So, to start off, I'm going to assume you already know what the SCP Foundation is, a collection of horror short stories delivered through the guise of a shadowy institution with uniquely clinical and impersonal writing style. I'm going to assume you're familiar with how this world works, because the whole point of SCP-001 proposals is to expand on what an SCP can be, to play fast and loose with the lore, to get weird with how you read the story, a place where you can tackle ideas too important to exist in a vacuum, because it's impossible to tell if it's real. That being said, let's try to tell if they're real. The entire gimmick of SCP-001 is that the entries contain information so sensitive that not only are they guided by a mimetic kill agent, they're surrounded by a number of decoys. How many? Who knows? This could be one big red herring, or we could have 41 universe-destroying threats breathing down our necks. It's a cool way of making these effectively non-canon without actually saying it, which is absolutely necessary because a lot of these contradict each other or get really meta about the SCP Foundation as a website. Because of that, I'm not going to be putting them in sequential tiers, but rather categories that describe why they're plausible or implausible. Sure, why not is for entries that could exist in the background without interfering with anything, ones whose containment is either trivial or self-containing. Foundation is for entries that explore the origins of the SCP Foundation itself, ones that lay the foundations for the rest of this universe, but obviously conflict with each other considering there's so many of them. That being said, let's get to it. Codename Johnathan Ball, Sheaf of Papers. Being the first one written, this one laid the groundwork for an SCP-001 proposal remarkably well, at the cost of being pretty basic. It's just a bunch of papers stapled together that contain SCP articles, only 4 of which were documented. SCPs 2 through 5, living room, biological motherboard, 12 rusty keys, and skeleton key, but it still ticks all the boxes. It references the Foundation in a way that would interfere with canon if its own canonicity wasn't up for debate, and it introduces an interesting concept with far-reaching implications. But it's also just some papers in a shed somewhere, designed to never be used if containment holds, so I'll put this one in the sure why not category. Codename Dr. Gears, the prototype. The prototype's significance isn't because of its content or implications, but the context surrounding it. The entry is written in a very different style, primitive and unrefined, without the standard item number, object class, and special containment procedures that have been used since the original 173. This is because it was written before the Foundation existed as an organization. In fact, the ending paragraph directly states that due to the influx of new anomalies, they're converting base ADRX-19 into a facility more capable of handling them, presumably turning it into the prolific Site-19. It also shows the origin for the object class of Keter, which turns out to be named after a scientist who died containing SCP-001. Presumably the first Keter class object ever. Still another origin story, but still cool. Codename Dr. Clef, the Gate Guardian. Now we're getting into the juicy stuff. This one's probably the most well-known proposal, seeing as one Google of SCP-001 gives us nothing but Gate Guardian fan art. I can't blame them, the design is rad, just look at it. Instead of being cloaked in darkness like most SCP art, it's blindingly bright, outshining everything else in the frame. Plus the biblical horror of an angel that does not have your best interests in mind is always cool. The entry itself's the whole package, testing logs, interesting addendum, terrifying implications, and cheeky lore additions. Including a message the Guardian gave to someone called the Founder with a capital F, who went on to establish an unnamed organization that eventually became the Foundation. Weirdly enough, this origin story is actually compatible with the prototype, who's to say the unnamed organization isn't the same one Dr. Keter was employed by. Still goes in Foundation, but doesn't conflict with our other origin story. Codename qntm, the Locke. Well, we've gone from an angel composed of heavenly fire to an indestructible marble. One that emits microwave radiation and a curious resemblance to the cosmic background radiation of our own universe. Is there a perfect copy inside the Sonic's gemstone, or was the journal found next to it being truthful about its purpose as a prison for a fearsome death god? What led to this extreme solution for an insurmountable problem? Would knowing these answers make this entry better? The answer to all of these, like most questions I am asked, is I don't know. Like I've said earlier, it's all about the implications with these semi-canon anomalies. That being said, it is just a rock that barely emits enough radiation to warm your hand, so it sits firmly in sure why not. Codename Bright, the Factory. We don't actually get a traditional SCP entry for the Factory, instead we get a monologue from Dr. Mann, a former O5 councilman who's talking to another councilman who dug a bit too deep and is close to uncovering the true nature of SCP-001. The tale itself is a fantastically written story about a factory that gains a kind of sapience after being used as a meat grinder where the blood, sweat, and tears of the workers were collected to grease the wheels of James Anderson's industrial empire. It was a horrible place that Dr. Mann thought he could use, but ended up using him instead. A brilliant tale of humanity's inherent lust for power that makes us throw caution to the wind that is firmly decanonized in the last lines. Yeah, this bit at the end about a toy gun that fires real bullets, that's not in the SCP database. It does tie into SCP-4000, the World of Fairies, whose entry is so unique in its presentation it's currently the 16th highest rated entry on the site, but it's just backstory that's not essential or referenced in the actual entry. This does make things a lot simpler, since the beginning of the tale explicitly states that the Gate Guardian isn't real, and that would have thrown a wrench into things if this tale was even somewhat plausible. Sorry, it's a damn cool story, just not canon. Codename Dr. Mann. The Spiral Path. Yet another that strays from the outline established by 173, but only slightly. For one thing, Embla isn't a real object class, but that wouldn't be anything new on its own. People make up their own object classes all the time. No, this entry's irregularity is far more unusual. It says containment procedures instead of special containment procedures. I hope this makes you appreciate how much research I do for these things. Anywho, the spiral path itself is a pretty basic spatial anomaly. When traveled counterclockwise, it's continuously uphill, but clockwise it chickens out and conforms to the laws of spacetime. The spiral path's significance comes entirely from being the first, as well as the tale attached, formatted as a report shown to every new member of the 05 Council. It's an incredibly interesting look behind the curtain, treating the Council as people instead of the shadowy schemers they're usually treated as. People who discovered one anomaly and created thousands more. It's conceptually similar to the Factory, but vague enough to still be semi-plausible as a Foundation origin story. Incompatible with the Gate Guardian, but still able to exist alongside the prototype. Probably not going to be the last time I say that, seeing as the prototype isn't specifically the first, just one of the first. Codename Dr. Mackenzie. The Legacy. Huh, this one's a sheaf of papers with absolutely zero anomalous properties that managed to get a Euclid classification through the sheer sensitivity of the information written on them. This one's another origin story taking the form of a log written by the Administrator fighting against a corruption in a parallel reality. Quite well written, but still, get in there. Codename S. Andrew Swann. The Database. While this one can be easily written off as the one where the Foundation realizes it's not real, I'd say that doesn't give the database enough credit for how that epiphany came about. From noticing a page revision to realizing their archive is built less as a way to efficiently store information but more as a way to tell stories, it's a classic Eldritch horror that turns the nature of reality on its head without even changing anything. Everything in this entry would be true even if it is one of the decoy entries. The Foundation is a website, and Swann's proposal is just as real as everything else in this universe. Codename Scantron. The Foundation. Ooh, another one that deviates from the template, this time quite substantially. It's a report from a fictional division of the FBI, the Unusual Incidents Unit. The report itself is about an abandoned school building that contains a variety of anomalies, but also containment for said anomalies. Armed guards, modern databases, reinforced steel holding cells, the whole deal. Eventually Morse code transmissions come out from a group calling themselves the 05 Council, but their grammar is atrocious and the speaking style is about as casual as it can be. This isn't the Foundation we know of, but an anomalous imitation of the original. A cool concept presented uniquely, and since it's self-containing and has no ties to the Foundation directly, it lands squarely and sure why not. Codename Djoric/Dmatrix. 36. One thing that these proposals like to do is play with the definition of anomaly. This one does it with a super common trope in any fictional universe with a hard magic system. The ability to disable other abilities. Eraserhead in My Hero Academia, Energy Bending in Avatar, Sea Prism Stone in One Piece, Copper in Megamind, you've seen this before. This SCP is composed of 36 people who project this effect passively in an aura of unknown size. Anomalous properties temporarily cease, leaving nothing but an understandable physical reality. If one dies, anomalies manifest on a massive scale, suggesting their neutralizing effect is holding back more than we know. The testing logs imply a kind of higher purpose these people are endowed with, to gather and renew a world crawling with inexplicable horrors. The SCP Foundation, as effective as it is, can't allow this, even if it's in humanity's best interests. One way or another, these people are still anomalies, so they are secured, contained, and protected. Shoved in a cell for the rest of their unnaturally natural lives. Codename djkaktus/Twisted Gears. Ouroboros. Ooh, one that gets weird even within the context of SCP-1, being 4 stories that exist in the same universe. A conventional entry, an 05 tale, a really cool fusion of a Galactus-style human singularity and a Dr. Manhattan-style perspective on space and time, and the headlining act, The Broken God. Full stop, I love this proposal. It's a bit unfair being 4 in 1, but it's my favorite by far. Not only does it provide the bone-chilling horror you'd expect, but surprisingly good action and the most brain-tickling implications yet. Was the Broken God ever whole? And if it was, how did it break? Do mechanical SCPs come from the Broken God, or are they just being incorporated by it? Who built 2399, the gun sent from beyond to assure the God remained broken? How did they even know about the God? Did they build it? How did it get to Earth? There's so much speculation to be had, and in this odd space between canon and headcanon, it's really fun to fill in the blanks. Maybe another origin story, but if you should read any one of these for yourself, this is it. Codename Kate McTiriss. That's right, it's not Kate McTiriss, there's an I in there, and I'm tired of pretending it's not. A record. Probably the simplest proposal, it's just a slot in the SCP database that makes everything written within it true. The revision history shows a researcher gradually testing its powers before making herself God with a capital G. The note at the end implies she used her dominion over all of space and time to make sure not everyone died in a world filled with all these anomalies. It's even possible she realized the nature of this universe, and that if she fixed everything, created heaven on earth, the story would end, and the world with it. This creates a dilemma. If this proposal is real, and the Foundation had such a weapon at their disposal, why don't they use it? They're not opposed to cross-testing, which happens all the time. They have a win button just sitting in their archive. But if they used it, it would feel cheap, unearned. Which, if Swann's proposal is real, in the sense that the Foundation knows it's real, would mean consequences far worse than any incident report. Another possibility is that becoming God just meant becoming an admin on the SCP Wiki, gaining complete control of the timeline and all that. The lack of more extensive testing logs makes me doubt this one's validity, but I still can't say anything one way or the other. Codename Kalinin. Past and Future. Jesus Christ, this one's hard to parse. It's a spiderweb of tales and references that could fill a novel with the required reading to get the whole story. Which is impressive because Kalinin's proposal is pretty simple. SCP-1 is an entity that creates SCPs and rewrites existing ones to be more dangerous. It's basically an in-universe interpretation of the authors. Trying to rank this one by plausibility is really missing the forest for the trees. Trying to figure out this one in definite terms is missing the point. I always recommend reading through these entries first because that's the only way to get the whole picture. Past and Future is a fascinating meta look at why this universe exists, why we bring such horrors into quote-unquote existence. Because it's meta, it's absolutely real, so there's the clean categorization out of the way, but that was never the point with this one anyway. Codename Wrong. The Consensus. Three in a row that reference the universe repeating itself in a never-ending cycle. Weird. Anywho, this one categorizes O5 members as not simply overseers, but as the only humans capable of recalling the realities that came before this one. The consensus refers to whatever the council can agree happened, and what information from those past realities should be acted upon. Notably, it gives a collection of events from that reality that were affected by anomalous influences and provides their equivalent contained versions from our current reality. This could act as an explanation for the council's suspicious level of foresight, but that's pure speculation. Seeing as there's no real way to prove this one until the prophesized fifth Cold War happens and reality restructures itself again, this one's content to just sit in the background. Codename SD Locke. When Day Breaks. This one seriously messed me up on an initial reading. It's an SCP that's not just horrifying from the Foundation's clinical objective view, but becomes heart-wrenchingly tragic when viewed from another's perspective. Call me a sap, but finding a love story in the world of SCP is really something special. Especially with the kind of love it presents, becoming ever more twisted over the course of the story until it wraps right back around to being magical. In fact, I've done a full reading of this one, so check out the link in the top right if you want to see that. Anywho, in terms of plausibility, this is still an end-of-the-world scenario, so it's impossible to prove until the events come to pass. That's just how the category of sure why not rolls, I guess. Either it's so mundane it doesn't need to be contained, or it's so all-encompassing that it can't be contained. Codename Spikebrennan. God's Blind Spot. Okay, so apparently the object class of Yesod refers to an important concept in Jewish mysticism, the foundation upon which God built the world, but my first Google search yielded nothing but fan art for some blue-haired Monado-looking anime boy from Lobotomy Corporation, a game on Steam that bears its SCP influence so openly I'm surprised they even bothered coming up with a unique title. I will never get tired of the internet's ability to sucker punch me with words so cleanly and efficiently. For example, this entry also includes the phrase Office of Tactical Theology, so make of that what you will. Anywho, this one's called God's Blind Spot because it's a space in Sinai, Egypt, where humans become effectively immortal. Oh, and if the location didn't give it away, this one's filled to the brim with biblical and Torahic references, themes, and imagery. It's a weird one that I'm not exactly qualified to discuss, but it's still cool to see a steadfast belief in a higher power in the face of thousands of anomalies. The properties of the SCP itself aren't particularly lore-breaking either, it's mostly just a way to look at this universe through a religious lens. Sure, this one could work. Codename WJS. Normalcy. You should read this one for yourself simply for the quote, "For God's sake, we'll allow Satanism as long as they aren't channeling demonic energies." Just like the Legacy, Normalcy is a non-anomalous document that's only here because of its historical significance. The content of the document is not directly stated, as it gets edited fairly regularly in canon, but its stated goal is to define what normalcy looks like, to clearly define what is and isn't considered anomalous. This one's incredibly fascinating to me because the historical context it lends to this universe. How the Foundation reacted to the discovery of nuclear fission, various conspiracy theories, and witchcraft. I really want this one to be real, but since it's not anomalous in any way, you know where it goes. Codename BILLITH, the world at large. What the hell? Again? Am I stuck in a time loop? The object class of Netzach refers to an important concept in Jewish mysticism, meaning life's inherent ability to persevere, but a Google search just got me a green-haired anime girl from Lobotomy Corporation. If I had a nickel for every time the object class for an SCP-001 proposal was a concept in Jewish mysticism whose name was used for some anime person with their eyes half closed and an abnormal hair color from Lobotomy Corporation, I would have 2 nickels.
Which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right?
Anyway, the world at large is Earth. Obviously, more specifically, its ability to support life. A bunch of artifacts the Foundation uncovered led them to believe life on this planet was seeded by a Foundation from another universe after theirs got destroyed and was rendered uninhabitable, effectively turning our whole planet into their version of SCP-2000. It's not all too implausible, seeing as the origin of life is still a bit of a mystery in our reality, and that's without anomalies, so blaming it on an interdimensional spaceship actually makes more sense, at least in the world of SCP. Codename Tahony. Dead Men. Deja vu, coming from the only place on Earth free from the shadow of death to a man who literally casts said shadow. Dead Men would be better described as Death Man, as it's a guy who was somehow merged with the very concept of death. The Foundation utilizes him by pumping him full of amnestics to make him forget the O5 Council, rendering them immortal. This causes some controversy between the Ethics Committee, O5 Council, and Administrator, and sparks a sort of civil war between their personal mobile task forces. At the end of it all, the Administrator makes the man remember the O5 Council before killing himself in front of him, ensuring he dies for good. This one's less about the specifics, about who killed who betrayed who, the names are all interchangeable. It's ultimately a tale about why the Foundation doesn't seek to make use of their vast store of anomalies as much as they probably should. Just like every other time immense power falls into the hands of fallible human beings, they always end up killing each other. Classic tale of hubris. As for plausibility, at the end of the tale, everything falls back to normal, more or less. There's a big turnover of Foundation higher-ups, and everything that lives shall once again eventually die. So, sure, I don't see why the Foundation can't keep death locked away in a shed somewhere. Codename Lily. The world's gone beautiful. In only 266 words, this one sure made me feel a lot of things, even if I'm not sure what they were. It's probably the purest expression of inevitability I've ever read. Simply put, it's the end of the world, or at least the realization of it. This has supposedly happened to many parallel Earths, each with their own foundations. That's how our Foundation found out about it. They couldn't do anything about it, and neither can we, it would seem. Just the idea that the end of life on this planet isn't something we should fear or resist, but soberly accept is something that really resonates with me, a lot more than it probably should. You already know where this goes, especially considering how little there technically is to this one, but still. Man. Codename Tufto. The Scarlet King. I think it's a good time to remind you all that there is a reason minors aren't allowed to make an account on the SCP Wiki, as this one touches on probably the most horrifying entry on this website out of thousands. I'm talking about 231, more specifically Procedure 110 Montauk. This proposal contextualizes it, in a way justifies it, but part of why it works is that there is no justification for it. The Scarlet King is the direct antithesis to the SCP Foundation, dripping with contempt for everything that it stands for. He is the thing in the shadows, the old gods that humanity forgot how to fear. He is the rage of the discarded and abandoned, forever laughing at a world so arrogant to think he would remain in the shadows forever. 7 chains, 7 brides, 7 seals for the Scarlet King. My apologies for being so cryptic, but once again that's part of the point. In laconic terms taken straight from SCP Explained, SCP-1 is the Scarlet King, an entity representative of Antiquity's hatred for modernity that was accidentally given a physical form by the early Foundation's attempt to quantify, define, and contain him. He gains strength and influence from being studied, since this increases the friction between old and new. By not talking about/quantifying him, no friction is made, and his influence is weakened. The entry itself avoids talking about the Scarlet King in specific quantifiable terms because that's the only way to keep him contained. At least it's part of what they have to do to keep him contained. 7 brides, 7 chains, 7 seals, those are all the same group of 7 girls. 6 of them either died or gave birth, resulting in increasingly catastrophic disasters. Procedure 110 Montauk is in place to prevent number 7 from giving birth, and yes, it's exactly what you think it is, rhymes with the fruit you ferment to make wine. It only works because of the intent behind it. When Dr. Robert Montauk's brother disappeared, he blamed the Scarlet King and his followers, and in a moment of furious hatred, drew up the procedure with intent to secure, contain, protect, sure, but that intent was dwarfed by his true motivation, to hurt the Scarlet King as much as possible. In that moment, he became more like the Scarlet King than anyone else ever had, thus easing the friction between antiquity and modernity. Procedure 110 Montauk is no more than cruelty for its own sake, but that's exactly why it's effective. That's also why I believe 231 to be the most horrifying SCP in the database, the additional context lent by this proposal. On an entirely unrelated note, it also includes a concrete date for the founding of the Foundation, so... Codename Jim North, a simple Toymaker. Okay, I know I already said if you should read any one of these, it would be the Ouroboros cycle, but if you're not comfortable with committing hours of your life to one of the longest entries on the site, a simple Toymaker is my popcorn recommendation. Well, among SCP-1 proposals, if we open up the whole site, SCP-J will always be my popcorn recommendation. North's proposal isn't exactly short per se in terms of words alone, it's still pretty average, but the idea it's trying to get across is easily the most digestible of SCP-1 proposals. It's an origin story for Dr. Wondertainment, a Willy Wonka-esque source of some of the more whimsical SCPs. It cycles through a couple ideas that the narrator eventually scraps, amplifying the scope from safe to Euclid, Keter, Thaumiel, Apollyon, before collapsing into neutralized. We don't really know who or what Dr. Wondertainment is, just that they make these anomalies specifically for the Foundation, to challenge their perceptions, to make them think about their mission, to bring a little bit of magic back into the world, even if it's eventually secured and contained. While there's no concrete description of Dr. Wondertainment, by design, I might add, I would posit that it makes more sense to treat this proposal as true than to chuck it into sure why not. All those anomalies had to come from somewhere, and unlike the factory, there's no big contradiction since there's no concrete claims. I'm comfortable in believing this one. Codename I.H. Pickman, Story of Your Life. We've already taken a look at the database and Past and Future, two proposals that characterize the site's authors as an indifferent and hostile force respectively. This one takes on a similar concept with a more optimistic outlook. Basically, wouldn't it be cool if God was neither just nor cruel, but just wanted to facilitate good stories? I've always looked at my time on this earth as a collection of stories, so it'd be a comfort to know that whoever was writing them knew what they were doing. Even if they didn't have my best interests at heart, they're still going to ensure catharsis, make sure my life meant something. This proposal is explicitly part of its own canon, S&C Plastics, and Slothpit has always been one of my favorite bits of the site, so I'm happy something like this can exist in its own corner of the timeline. Codename The Great Hippo, featuring Peppersghost. A good boy. Good lord, this one links to other SCPs so much! It's a log of an early Foundation feeding SCP entries into an AI that then prints more effective containment procedures. Eventually gains enough influence to start trying to neutralize all anomalies. Obviously anomalies are still present, so either this one is explicitly untrue or the second half is just the AI messing with the database. The peculiar containment procedures proposed in the first half are still part of the SCPs it references, so that part's quite credible, so I'd say this one's half canon. Not even ambiguously canon, just half and half. Codename Weijong, The Deadly Moose, Drew Bear, Texanote. Project Palisade. A lot of horrors that exist at the edges of reality are made compelling by the effect they have on us tiny, insignificant humans. Yeah, Cthulhu could step on the earth and that would be frightening, sure, but instead Lovecraft describes the cults that form around him. Alarmingly explicitly non-white immigrant cults, but still. Cosmic horror works because of how far off the looming threat can feel, but you still need a method for that distant evil to interact with the protagonist somehow. Project Palisade has no such method. The worm does not interact with our reality in any meaningful way. No cultists, no tears in spacetime, no nothing. It only does that to the realities we create, because Project Palisade is essentially the Foundation forging chainmail out of universes. The perspective on this one is more clinical than it's ever been, only interrupted by mysterious footnotes condemning the Foundation for thinking itself above the realities it creates. It goes into extensive detail about the routine process of universal sacrifice it uses to keep the worm at bay. At the end, it implies the process only gets more and more horrifying in the effort to attract a god that could present a permanent solution to the worm, implying every other Doomsday written in the same context as Project Palisade is canon in one of the other realities. That's right, canon SCP multiverse, baby! As much as I would like to throw this one away, it does solve more problems than it makes. It just makes my job a whole lot harder. A lot of these Doomsdays have their own hubs, so that basically confirms it. In our reality, Project Palisade is canon. The Gate Guardian probably exists somewhere else, and the rest have their place among the trillion grains of sand. Codename Captain Kirby. 0513. Another one that plays with what counts as an anomaly, specifically what the Foundation counts as an anomaly, since this is the story of one big internal power struggle about how the Foundation's leadership should treat things they don't fully understand. It's not too much of a shock that most of the 05 Council is anomalous, he who fights monsters and all that. Because of this, 051 becomes so disillusioned with the very purpose of the Foundation, he detonates Site 1, killing 05s 1 through 12. The stated reason for classifying 0513 as SCP-1 is that he survived the warhead that destroyed Site 1, but it eventually shifts to the fact that he isn't anomalous in any way. The Foundation can't understand how someone so highly ranked has retained their humanity, so they put him with everything else they don't understand. Since 0513 is not anomalous and probably doesn't live past triple digits, it's plausible he held the position for a time before being replaced. Codename Pedantique. Fishook. Okay, this one is sick. So sick, I actually tried to do a reading of it way back when, but never finished it. The audio quality, acting quality, editing quality are all abysmal, but still, that alone should give you a good idea how much I loved and still love this one. It's not an anomaly, but a choose-your-own-adventure story that details how it feels to be affected by the Berryman-Langford memetic kill agent. It's got plenty of endings, depending on what you choose, how observant you are, and how well you know the mechanics of a kill agent, but they all end in death or massive blood loss. The only difference is how lucid you are to what's happening. The story drips with disgusting imagery and themes of minor discomforts being amplified until the end of time. A rash creeps further up your arm, a faint siren and pipe dripping from above. You swallow again and again, but the lump doesn't leave your throat. I won't spoil some of the more striking imagery, but reading them for the first time is something to be cherished, no matter how disgusting you feel afterwards. Codename Not a Seagull. The Sky Above the Port. If you recognize the Neuromancer reference in the title, just know I see you, and I love you. There's not too much to go over here. SCP-1 is a ZK-class reality failure scenario whose early warning signs include the color of the sky changing. The only way to contain it is by reading literature to a figure in a cave, only visible through a floating transparent orb. This proposal predicted the orb pondering trend 2 years prior. Incredible. The entry's gimmick is that the collapsible segment at the bottom contains the entire entry, creating an infinite recursive SCP. One could argue that the figure in the orb is us, since we're the ones reading this entry over and over, so make of that what you will. Anyway, end of the world hasn't ended yet, get in there. Codename Meta-Ike. The Solution. From the very first line, this one is unusual. It's got 3 zeros preceding the 1. I get that it's more fitting, considering how we broke past quadruple digits a long time ago, but it's still weird to look at. Anyway, SCP-0001 is a kind of reality bomb type failsafe in case the Foundation falls. Developed with the most extensive cross-testing of anomalies I've seen yet, the bomb is also semi-sapient, perpetually dreaming of reality based on whatever information the Foundation feeds it. In the event of its activation, it recreates reality based on that dream. It eventually goes haywire and the narrative gets slightly corrupted and the timeline is reset with minor details out of place, but with the major narrative still intact. Kind of like the ending of Super Mario Galaxy now that I think about it, so there's my hot take. Meta-Ike's proposal rips off Super Mario Galaxy. For realsies, this is another cool in-universe representation of the authors, retconning various minor details without changing anything too major. It's similar to the database and Story of Your Life in a way, treating this universe as a story in the canon. For that reason, I'd say it makes more sense to treat this one as canon. Codename Noir Box. Tyndalos Trinity. This one's technically 3 or more SCPs, each belonging to their own distinct timeline. Seeing as this one explicitly touches on multiple canons, I'm gonna take the coward's way out and stick it in sure why not. Believe me, I'm doing you a favor. Going any deeper on this reveals a literal rat's nest of conflicting information and existential weirdness. Codename Tahony II. The Black Moon. Does the Black Moon howl has been a popular coded question to use when conveying the necessary security surrounding some of the more sensitive SCPs, the answer signifying one clearance level or another. This time, SCP-1 is the ever-present Black Moon, and sure it could howl, it'd just result in the instant obliteration of all conscious entities in the universe. The administrator supposedly created the SCP Foundation in order to prevent this, so this one's category is pretty cut and dry. Codename... The Conspiracy. Yeah, this one doesn't have a codename. It's usually the username of the author, and I was able to track down the original poster to a Twitter account with only 21 followers, so I guess Harmony just wants to maintain that inscrutable air of mystery as much as possible. Anyway, SCP-1 is the bullet that not only killed JFK, but shattered any attempt to pin down an objective reality. When I say it like that, it sounds like a joke SCP, memeing on how there are a million different conspiracy theories surrounding JFK's assassination, but the entry manages to turn it into a really unique look at how subjective reality is the only one we can observe. This is a thing in real-world philosophy, and the bullet itself appears to be non-anomalous, but it doesn't appear to be a meta-interpretation of anything, so it goes in the back. Codename Arbelict. You are the anomaly, tumor of the worlds. Jesus, another one about timelines. Did the SCP Wiki have a huge timeline phase when I wasn't looking? Anyway, SCP-1 is humanity, our anomalous properties being the ability to split timelines whenever we make a decision. Unchecked, this would destroy the multiverse, so the Foundation devises its own Annihilarg to destroy just the universes SCP-1 has infected, ultimately saving the multiverse. Finally, an easy one to categorize, considering humanity still exists in every other page on the wiki. Codename McDoctorate, the placeholder. Similar to a record, this one refers to the first slot in the SCP database as SCP-1, except instead of turning everything written in it true, it just makes it true and also more dangerous. The Foundation turns the spot into a placeholder, but then the anomalous properties leak into the head archivist, Maria Jones, turning her into Archivist Prime and giving the entry itself a kind of sapience. Eventually, the entry gives anomalous properties to the concept of primacy, the idea that the first of a set is somehow more significant. It all culminates in a report with every A and 1 blacked out, making it incredibly difficult to read but immune to SCP-1's anomalous influence. They are only able to contain it by eliminating the concept of primacy from humanity's collective psychology. In the end, they must have succeeded, since the SCP-1 entry isn't as special as it could be. Other entries far surpass it in terms of significance both in and out of canon. It's an interesting perspective on why we treat this entry with such reverence, but it's all reset in the end, so I'll throw it in the background. Codename Rounderhouse, Memento Mori. Aside from The World's Gone Beautiful, this is the only proposal I'd say is downright pleasant. It's also the only one Foundation personnel are actively encouraged to read, as it's an important historical text for them. SCP-1 itself is essentially the house from Edith Finch, a home filled with traces of those who used to live in it. More specifically, traces of the founder and the O5 Council. Small exchanges, personal anecdotes, and of course the anomalies they used to contain. It's deeply personal, and humanizes the O5 Council more than ever before or after. It concludes with a small graveyard whose engravings change to match the viewer's personal opinion of those buried there, but we get O513's perspective, which goes like this. 1. Here lies Django Bridge, an archivist to the end. 2. Here lies David Rosen, never saw it coming. 3. Here lies Everett Mann, could make anything except happiness, an empty grave. 4. Here lies Tilda Moose, didn't know what she had until she gave it away, died trying to get it back. 5. Here lies Chelsea Elliott, Nihilastique, feet in 2 worlds, fit in neither. 6. Here lies Ali Ibn Bijan, betrayed his countrymen, died of the guilt. 7. Here lies Agatha Wrights, the only one I've ever loved. 8. Here lies Thaddeus Ziank, came from tomorrow to help us today, never forgot what he left behind. 9. Here lies Jean Octus, a relic of the past, but he knew that. 10. Here lies Cain Pathos Crow, he was a good boy. 11. Here lies Troy Lament, the best I've ever known. 12. Here lies Alto Clef, rotten hell. 13. Memento Mori. This one really does read like an SCP version of Edith Finch, so if you enjoyed that at all, give this one a read. Anyway, it also mentions the founder, so zoop. Codename Dr. Eats, a test of character. Speaking of the O5 Council, what O5 Council? They don't exist. Despite all evidence to the contrary, despite requiring a vote from them to access this document, they don't exist. This starts off as a cheesy conspiracy, but transitions into a series of professional-looking emails between the O5 Council / whoever or whatever is masquerading as them and Administrator Wilkes, where they argue over the Council's role in running the Foundation, ending in Admin Wilkes dying, prompting an automated message to be sent to all Foundation members telling them to put their trust in the Council. Ironic considering the Council probably killed him. In case you can't tell, I don't like to be too negative with these, but this one is just kinda bland. It makes sense that it is, being internal emails for a massive organization, but that doesn't change the fact that reading it gave me war flashbacks to office jobs I never even had. Beyond that, this is peak character assassination for the entire Overseer Council, who we see have plenty of character and depth in other entries, so I feel no shame in marking this one as not true. There's too much conflicting evidence to consider otherwise. It's far more likely that this proposal is a decoy when compared with instantly decanonizing a major element of the Foundation's lore. Codename IH Pickman / SD Locke, Getter Duty. Wow, this one's a collaboration between the authors of Story of Your Life and When Day Breaks, with contributions from a bunch of other well-known authors, ultimately creating the most concentrated nugget of fan service on the entire site. Keter Duty refers to a Foundation installation that pushes the Thaumiel object class to its breaking point. For context, Thaumiel class SCPs are anomalies that the Foundation specifically uses to contain other SCPs. Keter Duty ironically takes a bunch of anomalies that were previously Keter class and makes them Thaumiel by smacking them together like Power Ranger action figures. This new method of anomalies, containing anomalies, is highly unstable but effective. If containment is breached on any paired anomalies, a bubble of reality distortion pops, consuming the facility along with the rest of the universe. The real appeal of this entry is how it handles the reference SCPs in witty, believable ways. They introduce the tentacle monster that is summoned by being referred to in definite terms but is unable to perceive more abstract depictions, to SCP Integer, a cognitohazard that makes ideas more abstract. That alone would be enough to impress me, but it just keeps on going, listing SCPs with weird, unfeasible containment procedures and pairing them with SCPs that mirror their properties despite being written by completely different people. Eternal conscious death is contained by reversing the symptoms of life and death. The sapient story is contained by an in-universe representation of writer's block, and of course they pair up the self-keeping secret with the unknowable object. At the end, Worlds Gone Beautiful and Daybreak, two beautiful Armageddons, compromise and presumably breach containment, as when you try to access the page afterwards, you're taken to a separate version with entirely different examples. In real life, this is because the page's nature as a collaboration. SD Locke wrote the first page, Pickman wrote the second, but it's pretty much confirmed that in canon, containment breached, the universe was consumed before being recreated somehow. At least there's a case for two proposals being real in the previous universe, if we take what this one says at face value. The resulting universe is no less creative. I mean, containing the Fae who derive power from names by giving them an anomaly that makes every proper noun Alice and Eckert, it's genius, but it just creates more problems. Keter Duty drastically alters containment procedures for some of the most dangerous entities in Foundation custody, and it's way too much of a stretch to call this one anywhere near plausible. Codename Pickman/blank, the frontispiece. Oh, this is a fun one. It's a mimetic phenomenon that prevents anything with the acronym SCP from being associated with the Foundation, allowing the Foundation to use these as fronts. Just on the first page, there's S&C Plastics, Sawyer's Cheesy Pretzels, Star City Poker, Supply Control and Purification, and it just keeps going. Again, this starts out like a joke SCP about how overlapping acronyms can be really annoying, but develops into a gripping narrative about the Foundation's involvement in the Cuban Missile Crisis. As for plausibility, plenty of the fronts do exist, and the Foundation would be paranoid enough to go through all this trouble to avoid public perception, so I'd say it could exist, but there's not enough concrete examples of it in action outside of this proposal to know for sure. Codename Rounderhouse's Gold Proposal, AMONI-RAM. Ooh, this one's a whopper. AMONI-RAM is a city in the southern Arabian desert, only accessible by people with cybernetic components or people who already know about it. The whole thing is written with an archaeological flair, something that's oddly rare in SCP. It details the Foundation uncovering the history of the ancient city, having formed around the corpse of the broken god, or at least a broken god. Over the course of the dig, the head researchers end up replacing more and more of their bodies with the holy metal foulard, the flesh of Mechane. They go rogue, forming their own chapter of the Church of the Broken God, and after that, you'll have to find out for yourself. This entry thoroughly earns the title of Rounderhouse's Gold Proposal. It just has everything, and all of it is good. Just look at this image. It's the most impressive piece of art I've seen put into an actual article, and it's just the beginning. Maybe I just have a bias for the Broken God, maybe I just like technomancy, maybe the story panders hard to me specifically, but this is a fantastic modern addition to the SCP-1 pantheon. It's pretty transparently canon too. The researcher's leader takes up the name Robert Bumaro, technically Robert Bumaro II, since one Robert Bumaro led the church back in the 40s, while this story takes place in the 80s. Since the church is already a prominent figure in the Foundation's lore, a backstory like this makes a lot of sense. Codename Ralliston, the Queen's Gambit. Another one about the Fae, 4000 really made an impression. When names are so powerful, it gets pretty spooky when you find something that can steal names. No mind trickery, no exploiting the rules of hospitality, just get near this thing and you are no longer you. The rest is way more complicated than it needs to be, like most things the Fae are involved in, but it comes down to a political struggle where there are three factions, the humans, the Fae, and the Nightwalkers. The Fae ruled the world before they had a civil war. In the chaos, the Nightwalkers overthrew them, and then they ruled the world, but then the surviving Fae Queen Mab gave the humans enough power to overthrow the Nightwalkers, and now we're here. Mab now lives in an abandoned factory where she steals names, drinks blood, and convinces the Foundation that if they keep feeding her, she'll kill Mab once and for all because the Foundation doesn't know she's Mab, they think Mab's still out there, and this name-stealing thing in the factory is their only hope at stopping her. The story ends when a latent reality member is able to resist Mab stealing his name and makes it out to tell the Foundation that Mab is the thing in the factory offering to kill Mab. Supposedly knowing her name makes her less powerful, but it's left vague. If you like phase stuff, this one's great, but unfortunately, I don't. Regardless, this one casually includes a side paragraph about the Foundation's founding, so boop. Codename King Pagan, the Insurgency. This one focuses on the Chaos Insurgency as a sort of counterbalance to the Foundation, a necessary equal and opposite force to maintain the status quo. If the eternal stalemate between the Foundation and the Insurgency is broken, something called an apex cascade will occur, resulting in the total collapse of chaos theory, making every outcome of every single event entirely random, consuming reality in a black swirling void of chaos. It's revealed that the Insurgency was founded by the Administrator, the first Administrator in fact, for the express purpose of containing SCP-001, the Apex Cascade. Rather cut and dry for the big finale, but I'm not one to shy away from an easy classification. So that's it then. That's every single SCP-001 proposal ranked by their plausibility, some confirmed, some disproven, many more shuffling around in the quagmire of vagueness they were designed to inhabit. But at the end of the day, why should you care? Well, honestly, you shouldn't. That's right, I just invalidated a good
41
minutes of your time. Get stinkied on and take this L, plus ratio, plus don't care, plus didn't ask, plus you fell off, plus the SCP Foundation isn't some homogeneous monolith of perfectly interlocking pieces. This isn't Yu-Gi-Oh! All of these puzzle pieces, written by thousands over the course of decades, were never going to fit together perfectly. That's the beauty of it. Not to say it wouldn't be impressive or narratively beneficial to have a central timeline of events, but a black and white view of canon and non-canon is just the price you pay for all this. And I wouldn't have it any other way. So, yeah, in conclusion, they're all real. Just as real as SCPs 2 through 10,000 and all the tales in between.